This bites. Your commercial's stupid, you're a no-talent hack, and your donuts are stale. I'm out of here. Fast, fast, fast.
When I first heard the rumors that DC Comics were moving away from like organized continuity and moving to this more ambiguous Omniverse where everything matters and every character moment really happened, even if they conflict with each other. You know, initially you're like, well, how's that going to work? How's any of that going to make sense? How's anything going to feel authentic when you're reading it? Or more importantly, how is anything going to feel important when you're reading it? We're not even into Infinite Frontier. It hasn't happened yet. And I'm already seeing the ramifications. You're seeing the fallout. There are so many successors to Batman in Gotham now. It's ridiculous. So in Future State, clearly there's the next Batman. Jace, don't call me Tim Fox. And then within Batman, Catwoman, this week we have the new protector of Gotham. Not a new Batman, but a new Batwoman. Bruce Wayne and Selina Kyle's daughter, Helen. She's the protector of Gotham. But also, clearly established for the last 20 years, the future protector of Gotham, the next Batman, is Terry McGinnis. But it's also heavily hinted at in other timelines that the future protector of Gotham will be Damian Wayne or potentially Dick Grayson. Is any of it important? How can any of it be important if it all happened? Who's really going to end up being the next Dark Knight? Now, I do think that they have watered down this concept to such a degree by playing it back so many times with different characters that it becomes a more and more moot point. But what about the fans of Terry McGinnis, maybe who have been collecting, you know, not that he's been the most published character over the last 20 years, but there's been a lot of comics with that character. A lot of people would acknowledge him as the future Batman of Gotham. It feels like he's been pushed to the wayside. What about the readers who bought into that character, who invested in that character, who collected all the comic books because they knew that they were reading the future tales of Batman and the future state of what Gotham would be? And now it's all been rendered meaningless. And how is anybody supposed to invest in Tim Fox, Jace Fox as the next Batman? It's just another timeline. That'll be undone in a few years when DC has another concept. He's clearly not the real protector of Gotham. You go read Batman Catwoman by Tom King this week, and it's Helen Wayne. Was it Helen Wayne Carter? Who knows? I don't know if she's a hyphenated last name, but the Batwoman is clearly in charge and really the new Batman. In another oddness, like an odd take on this one, guess who the new Commissioner Gordon is? Dick Grayson. When did Dick Grayson decide to take 6 years off of crime fighting so he could go and get his master's degree in criminology so he could become a detective in the GCPD and work his way up to being the commissioner of Gotham Police Department? A pretty ridiculous idea, but some people could say, well, Wes, that Tom King Batman Catwoman is a Black Label series. Those are supposed to be Elseworlds. Well, first, there's clearly a line within that comic book where Bruce Wayne refers to Alfred being dead, which happened in Tom King's in-continuity story, or at the time in continuity, which is now being continued on by James Tynion. So it's clearly a sequel to that. It's an ongoing part of that story. They also refer to each other as Batcat and all that crap that Tom King was doing in that line. So this is clearly an ongoing part of that story. You've also got James Tynion's story, which appears to be a diverge. So we have divergent timelines of the same story because James Tynion is writing the current Batman, but now we have Batman Catwoman that's the continuation of the story that James Tynion is also continuing. But we also know within the center of DC's new Omniverse model are two planets that's no longer Earth Zero. We've got Earth Elseworlds and Earth, like Omega Earth. Which ones are these stories coming from? Are these all coming from Elseworlds? Are these coming from Omega? Which ones count more? How is any of it important? They've essentially rendered nothing important. It's maddening. If you didn't want Tom King to finish his Batman story because sales had lagged, and they did, and it was embarrassing for them. Batman shouldn't be down at 65,000. They needed a new voice. Then you just make the change. Now they're diverging off. And now you have competing characters. Who's going to take up the cowl in the future? I can't be the only one frustrated. Be like, clearly, none of this is important. What the hell were DC Comics thinking about? They've had continuity for decades upon decades. They've tried to maintain continuity. They've certainly done it better in the past than they had done it recently. But because it got too difficult to maintain, they just decided to drop the model. All bets are out the window, and everything that readers and collectors have been investing in for decades has been rendered meaningless. What does any of it mean? I guess it's all Elseworlds now. Instead of everything being important, nothing is important. And this is exactly what I thought was probably going to happen when they announced, when the rumors came out, and then they finally confirmed it with the end of Dark Knight's Death Metal. Just this week, we've got an issue of Future State Catwoman, the future Selina Kyle. After she believes, we know that's not true, but she knows that Bruce Wayne died. She went to his funeral. There's a scene from that. And Selina Kyle in Future State Catwoman by Ram V is completely motivated by taking up the cause of Bruce Wayne after his death. And she doesn't feel like she's a hero, but she feels like she wants to carry on his mission and become a hero. And that is now her motivation. That is her response to the death of Bruce Wayne. Tom King's Batman Catwoman. We're on issue 3 on that one. It is a direct continuation of Tom King's Batman in continuity story where we have divergent timelines now. In that one, as soon as Bruce Wayne dies, she packs up, goes to Florida, where she knows the Joker is staying, or he's essentially in a retirement community, and goes and murders it. Apparently for the torment and things that he did to her, and she tried to ruin her relationship with Bruce Wayne. Bruce Wayne doesn't believe in murder. As soon as he dies, she's no longer a hero. The strings are off, and she goes back to her murderous ways and kills Joker. Which one is the real Selina Kyle? Is there any character continuity? Can we at least have that within the line of DC Comics? Sure, things can get more nuanced, but Bruce Wayne dying, does Catwoman just say, screw it, I'm going to go back and kill people and be a villain again? Or does she say, I'm going to take up the mantle and the cause of Bruce Wayne, the man that I love, and carry on his mission? Both of these stories are being released right now. Which one is the real Selina Kyle? Which one isn't? There's no continuity just as far as the timeline. There's no continuity as far as the characters. And like I said, how can you invest in anything now? Just seeing the way that things are happening now with DC Comics. It's very frustrating, very confusing. Are they going to start labeling their comics books? This one takes place on Earth Elseworlds. This is an Earth Omega comic series. So you know whether or not in your head canon, does this count or not? But if it all counts, just like the new Darkseid, every Darkseid is Darkseid now. Because he's the new Batman Who Lawless, apparently. Although we know we're going to see Batman Who Lawless. He'll come back and probably murder this new powerful Darkseid just so you know how powerful he is. I knew that this was coming, but I couldn't have imagined that weeks before Infinite Frontier ever even kicked off, that would be completely apparent that DC Comics is not going to be able to maintain this. And here's another conundrum. Now that they're telling all these divergent stories with different futures for everybody, there's no character continuity. In 3 years, probably less, when all the people at DC get together and they say, hey, listen, turns out the readers like continuity. They like knowing what happens in the timeline and what is the actual story and progression of these characters within the shared comic book universe. And we need to bring continuity back. How are they going to decide what counted and not? They're just making so much making things so much more difficult on themselves, but not only on themselves, they're making things difficult on the consumers, on the readers, and specifically the collectors. There are a lot of hardcore collectors. There are a lot of people that want to know the Batman story from beginning to end. You have no idea. You know, we used to know definitively in the future there was Terry McGinnis. He had a mentor, Bruce Wayne, and he was the new protector of Gotham. And yes, we did have some Elseworlds titles. You know, if you go over Deceased, the future Batman is certainly Damian Wayne. We know Deceased is its own specific timeline. It's its own little pocket universe. Anything happens in Batman White Knight, because it's got that label on it, we know that it's its own pocket universe. And all the continuity that happens there is its own internal continuity. It does not affect the mainline character. But they're not establishing that within DC Comics anymore. Even the Elseworlds or the Black Label brand doesn't really mean Elseworlds anymore. Because the Tom King story that he's writing, the Batman Catwoman, directly ties into the in-continuity story that he was writing before. Even Scott Snyder, when he wrote his Last Night on Earth, he specifically mentioned this was his planned ending for Batman. But they put it so far in the future in such an apocalyptic setting that it's its own thing. It could always be Elseworlds, and that was just his imagination of possibly the way that Batman would have ended and in the way that he would have written it. But it was never a definitive ending for Batman as a character. That could be treated as Elseworlds. It did tie into some things that Scott Snyder had done, but it was like a little mechanism that allowed this to happen, where, you know, they basically regrow Bruce Wayne's body. Was it the short story 27 with Sean Gordon Murphy as the artist? But things are all. But even if we take DC Comics at their word, Last Night on Earth is the definitive end of Batman, I guess. How many definitive endings can we have for Batman now? Every character can die. Every character could already die, but now, you know, you don't even have to explain it anymore. You just bring him back. As if continuity wasn't confusing enough and the stakes hadn't already been lowered enough by the constant deaths and resurrections and crisis reboots of the DC Comics universe. Or over Marvel Comics, the constant reboots of titles. We're going to kill off Wolverine. We're going to put him in an adamantium shell. Once adamantium sets, it literally cannot be broken. There's no way for this character ever to get out of this. Well, shit, we probably shouldn't have killed off Wolverine. Let's bring him back. Well, I guess the stakes weren't all that high. It wasn't very definitive. As if all that wasn't enough. Now with this new DC Omniverse method or model that they've incorporated, nothing is important. Nothing matters. Am I still invested in DC Comics characters? Yes. But it's hard to take any of these stories and the stakes seriously because none of it's real. Not that within the context of the universe, it's not real. Because there could be 5,000 things happening at once, all within the same Earth zero. Because everything matters. It's completely ridiculous. I knew it was a bad idea when they announced it, and now that I'm just seeing it at the early states of what it looks like, it's even worse than I could imagine. And like I said, in 3 years or less, when they say, you know what, readers like continuity, they think this new Omniverse model, while it's probably better for the creators, where they have less restrictions, especially if you're on the mainline story with the mainline, you know, create characters like your Superman, Batman, you know, your Justice League, where you have to, in theory, make things make sense and follow a timeline. They're not restricted by that anymore. But they never were on Elseworlds anyway. DC has always been famous for Elseworlds. But now they blurred the lines on what is the mainline series and what is Elseworlds. As far as I can tell, everything's Elseworlds. The Death of Superman and Up and Away and Man of Steel by John Byrne are all just as valid in continuity Superman stories as Red Sun, according to DC Comics. Does that make any sense to you? In one future, basically Dick Grayson as Nightwing takes over and takes out all the heroes in the New Order. That is just a valid future as future state, even though they're building up to that, because that's what DC Comics has told us. Ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. Goes against things that they've been working on and keeping somewhat together, although in my opinion it's been falling off the rails for a while now, together for decades. What's the point of investing in the characters? What's the point in trying to follow the story of Batman? They're all Divergent now. So for some people, I think this will be exciting. And I think they're like, oh, this is great. Everything could have happened. But I think for a lot of people that want some type of order in what they're reading, it's going to be disappointing. I want some order in the chaos. Can we? Obviously, we can't. We will eventually. DC is going to have to admit their mistake, because this is going to fall off the rails faster than they ever could have imagined. It's already confusing. We're getting multiple future Gothams with multiple protectors of Gotham. And nary a mention of Terry McGinnis, the one character who's firmly been established for 20 years as the next Batman. Bullshit. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. I would appreciate it very much. It helps us attract more views for the channel. Subscribe for future commentary, comic book news, and reviews. And don't forget to ring the bell for notifications. If you want to talk comics, movies, and much, much more, you can follow me on Twitter at Wes_from_TC. With that, Salamat Po, and I'm out.